I build with these hands that you gave me? Lord, with your wisdom, there's nothing I can't make.
This is the last time you're going to see Umpqua Sand and Gravel concrete trucks until I'm pouring the footings. But I got to tell you, the 85 yards of concrete that they've donated to this project has been a real boost for this whole operation, and I appreciate it very much. This is the same mix design that we used in the footings, but a much easier pour in that it's just dumped in from the top with the pump, but it's a higher stakes pour, because if something goes bad here today, it's going to be a hard thing to fix. But nothing's going to go wrong. It's a huge relief to be getting these forms poured, and I just can't wait to pull them off and see what we've got. First thing to point out here is, can you see how important it is to have absolute confidence in your form work at this point? That's why these Simon forms are unbeatable. All of these guys walking around up here, the weight and the jerking motion of the surging pump hose, the pressure of the concrete which builds and builds and builds. Just try to imagine what this scene would look like if we had an issue. It would be chaos. But I have zero concern about that because these things are bulletproof, and I've gone over them with a fine-tooth comb. I'm positive every connection is properly connected, and these things are going to take it. Besides the strength and the beauty of this system, we're pouring this 8-foot wall in 2 separate lifts. What I mean is, we're coming up about 5 feet high with the first lift. That puts about 750 pounds per square foot of hydrostatic form pressure at the bottom of the form system, and then 150 pounds per square foot at the top of that 5-foot lift. These forms won't even notice that load. So we'll put 5 feet in all the way along, and then go back, I don't know, maybe 30 to 45 minutes later, after that initial lift has taken what is called an initial set, which is it is just beginning to set up a little bit. It's beginning to become self-supporting, so the hydrostatic pressure is dropping off, and we'll lay the last 3 feet on the top, carefully vibrating the juncture between the lifts so that there is no cold joint at all. The concrete will bond together perfectly, and the wall will be perfectly intact and perfectly consistent across that joint. Speaking of vibrating that joint, in this process here today, that vibrator is the second most important tool on the job, right after the pump. Dustin used this, you saw him used it when we poured the footings. And those were only, 18 inches thick in one case and 12 inches thick in the other. But a vibrator this size really agitates the mix and will thoroughly consolidate the material if you're conscientious at all in making sure you have an even pattern of vibrating the material. And in this wall, we're very careful to vibrate it about every 12 inches because this thing has about a 16-inch radius where it will disrupt or agitate and thus consolidate the mix. But you do have to be careful, at least in any other form system, because it is vibrators that blow forms out. When you drop the head of that vibrator in here and it agitates that material, there is no self-supporting tendency in that mix at all. The entire weight of the concrete in that area increases its form pressure drastically. So you can't hang around in there, at least if you've got any question about the strength of your forms. And the other thing is, if you vibrate in one spot for too long, while that stuff is so agitated and liquefied and weak, the rocks will fall to the bottom. So if I just left the vibrator running down in the bottom of this form for any significant length of time, I would have rocks on the bottom and paste at the top, and that wall would not have the strength that it needed. So you drop the vibrator in quickly and immediately start retrieving it kind of slowly. Let's say maybe a foot per second until you're back out of the mix. Slide over a foot, drop it back in. Don't dilly-dally. And then when the next lift comes along, be careful to fully integrate the 2 lifts without dropping down into the lift that you've already vibrated. You've got to pay attention. The other advantage to pouring in 2 lifts is it enables the top half of this wall to be placed out of one truck. So we're not waiting, the finishers are not waiting as they're coming along, striking off and finishing the top of the wall at a cold joint while the next truck gets in position to finish it out. It makes a productive and consistent approach to finishing the top of the wall. You may ask yourself, what does it cost to put something like this in? You got several men, and you've got pumps, and you've got concrete, and boy, I bet there's a lot of money going out. Well, the fact is, it is expensive. Perhaps not as expensive as you would think, depending on your point of reference. And it is contributing a large amount of value to the lot, which otherwise would have been almost useless. But if you're curious about these expenses, go to our Patreon account. We will have a full disclosure of all of the hard costs and soft costs and everything that we can attribute to this project there. The list will be growing, and at some point it'll be in a very coherent spreadsheet format, probably, that may be useful to you. Over and over, people ask, why in the world would you buy a lot that requires so much work before you can even put the house on it? And the answer is not that complicated. It's everything to do with the price and the fact that I know how to do concrete, and that these retaining walls are going to increase the size of the lot. The lot is small, and it will still be small, but when I bought it, it was really small. These retaining walls are going to add, I don't know what the number is, because with this huge pile of dirt in the middle of the lot, I'm not sure how big it's going to be here in 2 or 3 weeks when it's done. But I can tell you it's going to be quite a bit bigger, like 20%, and that is the entire reason for putting this retaining effort into this lot. We're controlling the water, we're controlling the slopes, and we're making it bigger.
What could I build with these hands that you gave me? Lord, with your wisdom, there's nothing I can make. I'll be damned if I waste a day. What could I move with your strength if you let me? Lord, there ain't nothing that I couldn't be. If a mustard seed moves mountains too.
As if there are not enough dynamics on a concrete pour that'll mess you up, never forget that that concrete hose is going to surge and kick and twitch and buck and will wreck your forms, and it'll mar the concrete, even concrete that's been poured for a few days, if you let it lay out on top of there while you're working. So keep track of that concrete hose.
Just let me build a life, square plumb true.
Front dumping concrete trucks are so much more convenient. They're safer, they're more accurate, they have better traction, they can haul more concrete. It reduces the number of men you need, because in Las Vegas, working down there, and every other place that I ever worked in Wyoming or Washington State, the truck would pull up and there was one man who was dedicated to running the chute. He'd be pushing that chute sideways, back and forth, and signaling the truck driver as to what he should be doing as far as pulling ahead or backing up, or which direction, or whether to speed up the drum or slow it down. So the front dumper is less expensive and does a better job. As soon as one shows up in your town, it's going to become a race as to which of the batch plants can gear up first, because no one will order concrete out of a rear dumper once they find out how convenient these things are. So when I laid this wall out and excavated and set up the footings, I was assuming it would be one continuous, uninterrupted wall. But as I began to set the footings up and realized that the backyard on the house would necessarily be small, but the lot continues well up the hill, it occurred to me almost too late that the people who live here will need to have access to that hillside. So I just blocked out about 3 feet of the wall, cast 2 little returns, that is, the wall turns and runs back towards the hillside, which provides a great deal of additional strength right there, which obviates any need for additional engineering because of the opening. But in any case, I will be forming and pouring some concrete steps there when it's time to pour sidewalks and patios and curbs, and that this will become part of the landscaping and the use of this property occurred to me just at the last minute. I hope I don't have too many more of those oversights, and if I have them, I hope that last minute will be soon enough. It's hard to believe, but for about a half an hour after you get the mud in these forms, you can still wiggle the forms around. The turnbuckles will push it or pull it, and so I have a few minutes here to straighten this thing up. I do that with an offset line. That is, a line that is stretched parallel to the end points of each of the straight segments at a known distance from the inside of the form, so that I can just measure at various spacings from the inside of the form to the string and know right away whether or not this thing is straight. If it's not straight, I jump off and can push it or pull it with the turnbuckle to get it just as nice as I can get it. It's important to get these things straight. People are going to be living here for decades, and that's one of the really unavoidable conclusions about concrete work. Whatever you do in concrete is going to be there a long time. And so if it's ugly for a long time. And if it looks darn good, that's going to build your reputation long after you're dead and gone. Finishing the top of a wall is a lot easier than finishing a slab, but it uses essentially the same steps and most of the same tools. The first thing you do is strike it off. You rod it off. You're screeding. These terms are somewhat interchangeable. You're screeding the concrete off of the edge of the chamfer strips, just like you would off the edge of a form around the perimeter of your patio. And you're using a short piece of a 2x4 to do it. Cut it plenty short. You don't want it to be getting wedged in there if you happen to get a little rock trapped between the end of that little screed board you're using and the form. You want there to be room. You want to be able to scrape or cut the mud off flush with the top of the chamfer. But on the first pass, and when you first go over it, you don't cut it off quite flush with the chamfer. You let it ride up just a little bit. You tip your board back so that it is floating just a little bit over the top of the concrete and being left behind just a little proud or a little high of the chamfer. You do that because as the concrete hydrates, as it gets hard, it's going to shrink a little. We know that it does that over time. That's why it cracks. But even the plastic shrinkage right off the bat is significant. And so you leave that mud just a little high, and when you come back half an hour later or 45 minutes later, it's going to have pulled down and probably will be just about right for you to then float it and then trowel it. Floats are usually made of magnesium or wood. Trowels are made of steel. And so you trowel it as smooth as you can around the obstacles that I've left for these guys with these ties that are about 3 inches above the top of the wall. Trowel it, wipe out your lines as best you can, and then come back over and broom it. Or, like I did in this case, I will lightly pressure wash it after it's fairly hard at the end of the day and leave sort of a sand finish, which will look nice.
Lord, it's your peace that surpasses all understanding. It's like a fountain